Hello. Before we get back into the next agenda item, I'm going to take 1 minute to hear from Rochelle about Joshua.
About Joshua, I didn't know him very well personally, and I don't think anybody else on the COCL did know him very well, but he was an alternate that was appointed to this group, and he came to all the meetings. He was extremely passionate about police reform. He had in the military, he had been a military police person, and as a result of his experiences, I don't know what they were, he was suffering from PTSD, and ultimately decided to resign his position as alternate after talking over with his doctor what he was experiencing being a member of the group. I know at the beginning he did have some email exchanges with several members of the group, including our police advisors. They were pretty heated exchanges, and I'm not sure what all that meant to him, but I think it had an impact, a negative impact, unfortunately. I thought he was a very nice man, to me, a young man, and I'm very sorry for his loss.
Thank you, Rochelle. The next item is the October 21st presentation to Judge Simon. That's yours, bud. You got 10 minutes.
So, in previous COAB meetings, you selected myself to give testimony to Judge Simon. Subsequently, we sought volunteers to team with me in developing that testimony, and we also solicited open feedback from COAB members on things that should be considered for inclusion in that testimony. September 1st through 21st, we created 5 initial drafts and discussed them amongst the team. September 21st through 28th, the COCL team provided feedback with an eye towards ensuring that the points that we wanted to convey would resonate with or be clearly understood by the judge. I've gotten a lot of feedback from a lot of you in terms of how well crafted that document is, and a lot of the credit for that goes to the local COCL team. We finally sent out the draft to the subcommittee chairs on 10/1. We received broad acceptance from the chairs, and so now, as is our process for any major decision that we make, it's time for us to vote up or down on whether the testimony is acceptable to be brought to Judge Simon. If anyone has a material question that's really important to your decision, whether to vote up or down on this, let's entertain those for a few minutes and then move to a vote.
You all received copies of the draft in your packages, and you've had time to look at the testimony. Are there any substantive additions or corrections? There's a motion to approve the testimony. Is there a second? Rabbi Kahana seconds. All in favor, say aye. Everybody there. All opposed? Abstentions? My goodness. Thank you. I am going to...
It's quite a good draft. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Did you hear that, Bud? I'm going to, as the chair, exert some power here and move the order of things on the agenda. I'm going to ask the subcommittees to post their reports on the forum. Please post your reports on the forum no later than, let's say Tuesday. That frees up some time to hear from Rosenbaum and Watson about the COCO report that is being presented to COAB. So Dennis and Amy, now's your time. And you have more time than you did, but not a whole lot more.
Well, thank you. We will be brief because we're not going to review the report and bore you to death. Couple of things. First of all, so you have the second quarterly report. It should be posted, like you said, and others, you can get copies if you need it. We apologize for the length of it again. I forget what it is, 70 or 80 pages. But I know how difficult it is to be reading and commenting on all this that goes on. It's just enormous levels of work that none of us expected. We tried to simplify it this time a little bit. The format is structured so that it says, what the recommendations are quite simply, and what the justification for that was, and there's also this report card, as you know. It has different colors for different levels of compliance. It's something similar to what DOJ has done. Even though Dan pointed out to me there's something wrong with one of them. I'm not sure what he means, but we'll figure that out later. Anyway, I do want to say that we're, one of the themes there is, and it's a theme tonight too with all your recommendations about requests for data. We're trying to both recommend, be critical, be helpful of the PPB, the Portland Police Bureau, with regard to their existing data systems, as well as the creation of new metrics that we think are needed. And so I do have some compassion for them that this is an enormous, there's so much data being requested from everybody that there's going to be discussions about this and what's possible, and there's a lot of data collection ongoing. But I think both for the purpose of the settlement, this is important. The settlement agreement requires certain metrics to monitor compliance, as well as look at the impact of these various compliance measures on outcomes. But more importantly, from my perspective, having looked and studied policing around the country, modern progressive police departments are very information-driven, very learning organizations, are constantly collecting data to monitor both internal conditions and external environments, responding quickly to that data, making changes accordingly, reevaluating their policies and practices on the basis of that data. So I think if it's incorporated in Portland and becomes part of a way of doing business, that you're going to have a cutting-edge organization. I think there already is in a lot of ways here. That an organization that's evidence-based, community-oriented, and focused on public service. Now, overall, I just want to say we see continued improvements in compliance. If you compare our first and second reports, there's still a long way to go. That's why there's partial compliance with a lot of those paragraphs in the settlement agreement. But we have no reason to believe that the administration in the Police Bureau or the city is resisting this in any way. In fact, they've been quite cooperative with us, and so we feel that there is it's important to work together. We don't have a hostile relationship. We have a tense relationship at many times. We disagree. We've challenged them on a lot of things. But I think the commitment is there to make these reforms. I used to live in Portland a long time ago, but the time you're referring to a period where clearly there was not that level of cooperation. Some of you. In terms of the COAB, anyway, I just want to say it's an enormous undertaking that the city's doing. It requires lots of resources, lots of time, lots of bodies, lots of people, and it's going to take a lot of time. Now, in terms of the COAB, I mean, you guys know better than we do that there's been enormous progress here. I want to thank Bud and everyone else that contributed to the statements for Judge Simon, which is coming up. And we have to do the same as the COCL. And also for all the people that worked on these policy recommendations, I do think this is, some of this is actually pretty cutting edge. I've looked at other places around the country, but you're going to face this challenge in Portland because it's always this balance between trying to have all of our individual rights respected as they should be under the Constitution on the one hand, and also wanting public safety on the other. And so the police message too, I think, is coming out here. It's hard in some of these cases if the police are not proactive. In the research world now, we talk a lot about proactive policing as the good thing, but proactive policing is problematic sometimes. I will come out and tell you, you can read my testimony before President Obama's task force on 21st century policing. Consistent with what Tom is saying, I have pushed for a reduction in these investigatory stops, for pretext stops. I personally don't think they should be eliminated. I think that's going too far, but we all have, this is debate we can have some other time. But I think that they are a problem in America because they do show bias. But then the public wants the police in. I know Portland's going through some difficult times with crime and violence and gangs, and they expect the police to crack down on that. So this is the kind of dilemma. The community has all kinds of conflicting, sometimes conflicting messages. So it's fascinating work, and I wish keep up the good work. I think it's great. I would be dishonest if I stood here and said there haven't been some issues related to managing all of this and what you guys have done. I want to thank, the bottom line is that I just want to personally thank all of you for continuing to not be distracted by some of the things that are, and some are, tragic in this, as we learned tonight. But I think that there's been some particular things that we've struggled with in the COAB, but frankly, enormous progress since this started. With all the support, with the creation of the subcommittees, if we look back to the first quarter, now you have the subcommittees, you've got the leadership, the executive committee, you've got a chair. This is moving, and there's all these recommendations and policy recommendations and recommendations to the judge. It's actually enormous headway, and I just thank you for staying focused on the mission, the agenda, and not be distracted by some of the other things that do happen and are difficult with personnel or whatever else. And so I think I'll stop and give Amy a chance to say a few words here. Thank you. Oh, one thing. I just feel I owe it to Senator Gordley and thank her for clearing my name on this issue that I had no idea what it was about. So thank you.
Okay, well, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the sections of the report specific to crisis response. I think that's one area where we had a lot of partial compliances. PPB's made a lot of strides in terms of making changes in how they're doing business in order to meet the requirements of the settlement. They've done quite a lot in terms of creating the BHU, the advisory board, creating the ECIT units, expanding BHRT, and I'm really looking forward to when you all have the opportunity to hear the full presentation so all of those acronyms make sense in terms of really understanding what the structure is, so then we can have that conversation in terms of what is the feedback that the PPB really needs around what they're doing now. And one of the reasons why we've looked at what PPB's been doing, but we've only been able to really superficially look at how they've been meeting the requirements of the settlement agreement, because to really assess compliance, we need to get the right data and to be able to assess the implementation of some of the things they've started, but also the impacts on what's going on the street and how the community is experiencing that. So we've really been working hard with PPB to figure out how to capture the data that will be needed, other ways of capturing that data so that we can do a more in-depth look at compliance. And also bring that data back to the COAB too, so with the more information on what's actually going on and that data, we'll be able to move forward with really, really rich conversations about it. And certainly I know that we have the presentation coming up in November. I know there's a COAB member that will be sitting in on the ECIT training, and members of the COCL team will as well. So I think that will really help us get a more in-depth understanding so we can look at compliance moving forward. And I think really the key piece is having the right data. And I know that's what we've been talking about tonight, is figuring out what data will we need to assess it, and then how can we move forward and get that? Because sometimes it sounds like it's easy to capture, and it's not always. It's not always in one place. So really sitting down and working out what's important and then how we can capture it and then report it back so that the COAB and the community can provide feedback on that. So I think, a lot of work has been done, a lot of progress has been made. Certainly there's a lot more work to do and really to move this forward. And so I'm looking forward to kind of the work we're going to do in the next quarters and what we can report back as well, and then to get all of your feedback on this report as well as the work we have going forward.
And I just wanted to remind everybody, so the public has 30 days from October 1st or 2nd or something to review the report, and feel free to give us any, and same thing with the COAB. We really appreciated your comments last time. Actually, the COAB will officially give us feedback down the road. And I didn't thank the, to a substantial extent, I think when we asked the city to step up to help with training and everything in the last quarter, they did, and I want to acknowledge that. Also thank Brad and others and Commissioner Fritz for supporting the COAB. And I think that's it. Yeah. Thank you. Oh, does anyone want to ask us anything?
Also, I just want to acknowledge that everybody's working really hard. We know you are. We know PPB is. We know the city is. And so I think we're moving to a point where all that work can kind of merge together and make a difference. But we know you're working hard, and we appreciate it.
And you will get the community surveys done, by the way, and thank you. I meant to thank the COAB for their input in developing that. It relates to the community outreach subcommittee. DHM has completed that survey. It's 1,200 and some respondents citywide, oversampled African Americans and Latinos, and so it will be. It'll be out within a day or two if it's not out already. It is out.
Next Thursday at COAP's subcommittee meeting, they'll present their findings.
They're going to present at the COAP's subcommittee. Pardon?
Okay. Over at North Precinct subcommittee next Thursday at 6 o'clock, as a matter of fact. We'll be meeting, so
Thank you.
look forward
Any
to
other
seeing you.
questions? Bud?
So this question is both directed towards COCL and also to the public as maybe a bit of a challenge. When I read your report, which I've read it only once so far, I compared it to the scorecard that was delivered by the Department of Justice. My read of that made me feel like COCL and DOJ did see the same thing, that the city is acting in good faith, PPB is acting in good faith, however there are significant gaps. And it seemed that COCL was calling out more gaps, especially relating to data systems and the use of information effectively, than even the Department of Justice had. So I looked at this as sort of a win in that I felt it was going even deeper than what the Department of Justice had done. So my question for COCL is, is that your intent? Am I reading that right? And then since Nancy had given us some feedback, maybe seeming to say that the report didn't seem to go as far as it should, here I am perhaps misreading this document. So I encourage you to get into our forums and tell me why I'm wrong, because you need to correct me before we have our review meeting where we provide our formal feedback to COAB. Thank you.
I will just say briefly that, our training is in research, so we're big data fans. So we see it important to build these metrics. And, there is this issue that the Portland Police Bureau switched over to an entirely new records management system in like April or May. And that actually kept them, and is still keeping them to some extent, from meeting some of the reporting requirements of the settlement agreement. Because anytime you switch over, you understand data systems, but it's like there's a big major change. And so some of the geocodes don't work for being able to figure out where these offenses occurred, that sort of thing. They made a switch from the old Uniform Crime Report system, which has very few crime categories, to NIBRS, the National Incident-Based Reporting System, which has all kinds of categories. The other part that happened there is that the burden of checking all this the burden was moved down to the officers on the street to enter this information. So there's enormous training issues, et cetera. So we'll address some of this in a separate report that's coming out. But Portland Police Bureau, we asked them to look into this matters and get back to us. They have done that. They have a lot of people working on this. So that's just one example of how there's they're behind in getting the reports they need to produce the kind of force reports that are needed for the compliance. And we're staying on top of that now as an important issue, and we'll bring that up later. But anyway, yeah.
Rochelle, Philip, and Abel.
I just wanted to say, I just came back from the NACOL meeting tonight, and I attended several sessions on data, soft data, hard data, other kinds of data. There certainly was an emphasis on the police collecting data, but also to have the proper analysis of the data that you collect, and to have the right people to do it. So, for example, with stop data, it's not sufficient to just collect the stop data and say that so many white people were stopped and so many black people stopped and so many other people were stopped, and that just stop there. The important part is to know what happened after those people were stopped. And so the emphasis was going deeper into the data than the surface that's been done in a lot of places, maybe in Portland too, over time. So I hope we can do that. Thank you.
Philip.
Thank you.
Dennis, thank you for the report. And this time it seems the report was much easier to read as opposed to the last one, which was over 100 pages. This one is now down to 70 pages, so 30 pages less. Good on you for that. I really appreciated the color in the graph on the report card, just to get a quick pulse of what your findings were and what you've noticed overall. I like that addition to it. I did have a few questions, or I guess concerns for specific information in the report, and I don't know if now is the time to discuss this or if we'll be discussing this later. I guess that's a question for the chair, because I see the times, it's near 8:30.
You'll discuss it later.
Great, and I did ask a question in the forum, so if you have a chance to look at that and respond, that would be great. Thank you very much.
And I had another hand over here. Was it Abel?
We will probably have a hotly contested race for mayor. Can you speak now about how you're thinking about strategies to keep the urgency, to keep the momentum behind this work, to keep that in front of the other candidate?
Well, go ahead, Amy. No, we would prefer to stay out of the politics, but I think that I do feel badly for anyone who's in these situations. It's a difficult situation. Clearly we've written in a lengthy report, as has DOJ, that could be construed as critical in a lot of ways. And so anyone who wanted to take that apart could. I think, though, that it's important that kind of from our kind of balanced perspective that I don't have any dog in this fight, so to speak, as far as this stuff goes, but we have had cooperation. But I think that, wow, I'm not sure what to say about that. I think that we will keep, I cannot, the city, because of the nature of these things, as they've played out in other cities, I can tell you that cities cannot afford to ignore this, whether it's this mayor or another mayor, because cities that have fought this, and there are cities that have, I could list a few of them, it just gets worse. DOJ does not go away that easy. And so it's better to, work with everybody and cooperate and get this done, however long it takes. And we sense that the city has done that. I mean, I don't have I've never heard, honestly, I would not lie here, I've never heard anything from anyone trying to sneak around this. There's debates about all this data. We're going to have debates about how much data. I think Portland will be collecting more data than any city in America, which puts it on the cutting edge. Is it too much? Is it going to cost the city too much? I mean, that's the kind of stuff. But I think that everyone's going to be, and I wouldn't want to characterize Portland, even though there are serious problems here that need to be addressed, and they're all laid out in our reports and DOJ's report. In the bigger picture of things, Portland is a city that is on the cutting edge in many ways. I feel that just because, go visit, I don't want to name the cities now because they'll end up in the media, but go visit any cities further east and you'll see things are not nearly as nice and as friendly and as, responsive. So, I don't know.
Well, I appreciate your response. I'm just one who also thinks that we need to keep the political landscape or lay of the land in front of us so that we don't lose momentum. Things can get lost in translation, and we can't afford to have that happen with these efforts.
Thank you. Ciara?
So I've had the opportunity to read the first part of the report and have some initial feedback on it, having to do specifically with, I think, some emerging problematic language that I find around separating folks who experience mental health crisis and folks of color, and how sometimes in the tapes that I've observed or the recordings that I've observed of our board and other language have sometimes implicitly assumed that folks experiencing mental health crisis are only white. And so I would like to specifically ask that there be a more conscious intersectional perspective on this issue, understanding the impact of the conversation that we talked about earlier with some of the recommendations, understanding that bias does have an effect on behavioral and mental health outcomes, and specifically for communities of color, for LGBT folks, and other folks that were listed in some of our, any personal characteristics which have led to disparate outcomes. So I would like to see more attention to that, and specifically in some of the introductory language and work that we're doing.
Okay, I'm going to need to stop this part, and Dennis and Amy will be around after the meeting, so if you'd like to talk with them some more. One of the people who had signed up for public comment was indisposed at the time, so I'd like to call Teresa Is that your name? So the microphone is here. And public comment is limited to 3 minutes.
Okay. You sure? Okay. So I'm going to read an email on behalf of Don't Shoot Portland and Students for Change. We would like to, first of all, say that the conditions and culture set for the public by the City of Portland and the COAB in relation with its listed assignment of outreach and inclusion in this process has been extremely invasive and inconsiderate. I believe that Judge Simon set the circumstance in place so that all citizens could participate in the logistical changes necessary to influence a policy in policing that leads officers to their sworn duty. The victims and the families of those killed in these cases their voices have been routinely shut down by this communication process. Their voices matter.
You are not the good guys in this. The real consequences or circumstances of death and excessive force, you are the guilty party. The people are the ones willing to work within the confines of the judgment to receive the inking and justice that can be afforded to us.
Now, for the record, please, if you haven't already, find a way to advise us, the public, on how training of these officers in the Portland Police Bureau will affect the students at PSU as well as this campus. As we know, this police precinct is less than a 2-mile radius away. Both of these areas have high demographics of minorities and people with mental disabilities and issues. These are the exact demographics that we are talking about in this settlement, and that is very scary. That billboard is completely out of line. Please answer to us of this very important message, why that was even placed up, and is extremely threatening and a disgrace to the victims of police brutality and in-custody deaths. Thank you.
Thank you. I have one more thing to read to you, and then the Department of Justice presentation will be the last thing on our agenda. From the Albana Ministerial Alliance Coalition, a note that says the Albana Ministerial Alliance Coalition supports the DSUFCS 8 recommendations on bias-free policing. It's for your information. I just got it in my email. All right. So the last thing on our agenda is a presentation from the Department of Justice. And you originally had 5 minutes, now you have 10. So we need the overhead.
Yeah, if we can bring it up, probably that'd be good. Suffer from the same problem as Captain Marshman. These microphones always make me bend over to reach them. So my name is Brian Bueller. I'm sorry? Yeah, that's true. I'll see how this works. My name is Brian Bueller. I work with the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. I know there's been a number of us that have worked on this case and have met with you all. For what it's worth, Jonas Geisler, who's been here, is in my office. We partnered in the investigation, the lawsuit, and now in the enforcement of the settlement agreement with the U.S. Attorney's Office. Jared Hager from the U.S. Attorney's Office is here. And many of you know Adrian Brown from the U.S. Attorney's Office. I just wanted to, I think we wanted to give you a brief overview. I know that everyone has access to the compliance assessment report, and we're just here to do a brief presentation on it and see if we can give a little bit more of an explanation. I wanted to take a moment to thank you all. I've tried to do that individually as well. It's a really important service that you guys are conducting. I know it's a lot of hard work. I know it's a lot of personal sacrifice, but we really appreciate the expertise and the diversity of perspectives that you guys are bringing to this process. So I think it's critical. And actually, if I could just take a moment too, I think it's important to acknowledge the folks at PPB, specifically the compliance coordinators who provide the information and have coordinated our observations, and the city attorney's office as well. So just briefly, as you guys probably all know, our role under the agreement is monitoring and, where necessary, enforcement of the agreement. So we do periodic assessments like the one that we just issued in September for a number of reasons. I think it's important for us to conduct these assessments to be able to make timely decisions about monitoring and about enforcement of the agreement. But it's also as much to deliver helpful technical assistance in a way that can either help course correct or emphasize positive aspects of PPB's implementation. Another important aspect is giving another avenue for the public to weigh in on the process. You know, in this case, we also did it partially in anticipation of the hearing on October 21st and a meeting that we recently had with the AMAC coalition. You may ask what the findings in the report are based on. Part of it is based upon our personal observations and the observations of consultants when we're actually physically on site alongside PPB. Part of it is based upon documents that we've either requested or they've voluntarily supplied. Part of it is based upon the opinions of expert consultants that we have worked directly with and contract directly with. We have two currently working with us. One is a nationally renowned expert on policing named Charles Reynolds. And the other is Dr. Mark Munitz. He's an expert on crisis intervention. And then, of course, we rely upon the recommendations of another number of groups, the COAB, COCL, other city agencies, to reach findings. I think, you know, the report card sort of captures our assessment. So you can see, I'm just going to scroll briefly through it. I'm told this will scroll. Yeah, so you can see this is each of the status of compliance here captures, for the most part, several provisions. So use of force might contain, I don't know, 10 paragraphs, and so each of these captures several paragraphs that are each a little bit more detailed, but these are sort of summaries of the status of compliance for each of the subheadings of the agreement. And you can see that we found most of them were in partial compliance. It means that they've taken steps, but they haven't achieved full compliance. There's some areas that we need more information about. So they'll say rating pending. And there were, I think if you dig down into the report, beyond sort of the summary page, you'll find certain areas of non-compliance, and those are areas where we're going to focus our efforts forthcoming. I can try to do a brief overview of each area. I mean, obviously, with 10 minutes, it's hard to go into too much detail, but
you've got 2 minutes.
2 minutes? Okay.
So what I would prefer to do is ask the COAB if they have questions of you at this point.
Sure, that's fine.
Most of you have gotten copies of the report. Bud?
So you mentioned that COAB and COCL input was included into this report in some way. Could you describe that and tell me, does that mainly come from COCL's Q1 report card or somewhere else?
Sorry, if I misspoke, I was sort of generalizing about how we approach these reports. We recognize that the COAB got off the ground 9 months ago. So primarily in this case through review of the COCL Q1 report is the primary way. But we are sort of eager for recommendations, if not sort of desperate. So we're very interested and looking forward to more. Yep.
Tom?
Yep.
In terms of the recommendations we're making, will we hear from the DOJ?
Oh, will we provide feedback directly to you all? It's a fair question. I mean, in our assessment of whether the settlement agreement is being implemented, so let's just take this case. I don't think that's the kind of thing that you would see appear in one of these reports because, it's not. We wouldn't be assessing the recommendations that you make as a matter of enforcement. I don't want to commit either way to providing feedback on specific recommendations. That I can't commit to.
We're working on these recommendations. Okay,
go ahead.
Just
I
a second.
couldn't hear you.
I know. The mic just came on.
Okay.
So the question was really about the fact that recommendations are being made in subcommittees, then they're being brought to this body. And I think it was a consistent question that was asked across multiple subcommittees. Once the work has been done and the recommendations have been submitted to the Department of Justice via the COCL, great, then what happens? So I'm thinking we're just wanting some checks and balances in terms of if we're making the recommendations, if they're included, how they're included. We just want that. We want to be able to close the loop. So if we're doing the work and giving you the input, then we need to receive that back. I think that's what Tom is asking. That's what I want to know about too.
Okay, I understood Tom's question to be something slightly different. I think actually, if you dig into the report, so this is the first couple pages of a 96-page report. And if you dig into specific provisions, there's actually almost placeholders, as it were, where we say, we understand, for example, that the COAB is undertaking a review of the use of force policy. This was drafted and submitted on September 10th, and there was a little bit of a run-up to the drafting. But at that time, I don't think that review had taken place. Is that correct, Tom? Yeah. So we put in there a placeholder to say, look, we're eager for those recommendations, and I would expect that that you would see our internalization of those recommendations and our opinion based upon it in a subsequent report. Does that address the question?
Abel? Oh, I'm sorry. Alicia?
We can move on. Sort of. I'm still not clear. Once I did actually read the report. We actually addressed it in our subcommittee, and there were many things put in there, but I think I asked this question to Mary Claire. I think is that once we didn't, for instance, we didn't know until the report came out when we worked on the mental health directives that they had been included or incorporated because, there was sort of no checks and balance. We're just trying to sort of track the work that we're doing, where it goes, and then its level of effectiveness. And so there might be a better way, and that might be a COCL level discussion, a better way to sort of track that. That's all I'm saying.
Okay.
Thank you.
Abel?
The next time the DOJ reports out to the city, I would like to recommend that the chair of the COAB Executive Committee also be in the room together with the COAB chair and all the other parties to the settlement agreement. Is there anything that would prevent the executive committee chair from being considered for participation?
I don't think there's there's certainly no issue with incorporating a member of the COAB. I think perhaps the COAB chair was there, and you're saying an additional member, the chair of the executive committee.
I'm saying that we function with an executive committee and a chair of the executive committee. It just seems to me that that person should also be in the room.
Yeah. For what it's worth, I should just provide the context, which I think is a little bit of the backdrop to what you're asking. We held an agreement with the AMAC pursuant not to this settlement agreement, but pursuant to our collaborative agreement with the AMAC. And that was the first time at which this report was produced. At least it was produced the Friday before, and then we held the meeting on the Monday. So it was sort of the first time it was discussed, as it were, with the city. And what I'm hearing is additional COAB representation at any time that the assessment is produced. We'll certainly take it into consideration. In this case, it was due in part because that meeting was held pursuant to the collaborative agreement. It was not in any way to sort of ignore the representation of the COAB.
Okay, Bud, you're the last one.
Thank you, Kathleen. So just to make it clear that from the COAB's perspective, we put a great deal of diligence and effort into making sure that the recommendations that we create are intended as specific remedies to the requirements and issues called out in the settlement agreement. Our expectation then is that those recommendations will be carried forth and tracked by the city, by PPB, and by the Department of Justice to show the people that there is accountability in terms of implementing the recommendations of their representatives in addressing the requirements of the settlement agreement.
Fair. Yeah, I'm happy to respond. So I think 2 points. I mean, one, it's critical that you all understand, not only do we want to, but we are obligated to consider each and every one of your recommendations, and so we do. The second point is I'm understanding that the request, as I'm sort of hearing from numerous members of the COAB, is to implement a more formal sort of mechanism for, I think you used the phrase closing the loop, to track. Okay. I mean, we can look at sort of what shape that would take.
Okay, thank you very much.
So in the case of that, just let us know what the status is, whether or not you adopted it or not, because you're using the word consider, that you will consider, but if you decide to do more than just consider and actually apply them or employ the recommendations, then that would be nice to know. So.
Okay, it is 5 minutes past the time for closing this meeting, and unless you want to extend it
nope.
with a vote, then I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second? Excuse me? Yes, there is. All right. You want to say something about that?
Yes, on October 22nd, we will be back in this room for Town Hall first from 5:30 to 7:30 on the quarterly report. With COAB business beginning at 7:30, if not sooner, if there is not 2 hours worth of public testimony. We'll be taking up recommendations from the Data Systems Subcommittee on Directive 1010, use of force. 5:30 to 8:30.
Okay. So motion for adjournment was made and seconded. Can I get a bunch of hands up in the air saying yes? Okay. Passed.